All right, so let's talk planetary retrogression. To understand planetary retrogression properly, you must understand that we live in a geocentric universe, meaning the stars and planets and luminaries in the sky are revolving around us, and we're not in a vacuum abyss. The second thing to understand is that astrology is a planar science. It does require a plane to be true, and it is true. This video will show you why the planets retrogress, and this is provable with astronomy. To understand retrogression, let's first talk about progression, right? So planets either retrogress, which is to go backwards, or progress, which is to go forwards, right? If a planet goes from Aries to Taurus, hooray, he's progressing through the zodiac. If a planet goes from Aries to Pisces, oh, he's going backwards in the zodiac, he's retrogressing. So let's actually use the moon to talk about planetary progression, because the moon is just great to study when you're trying to understand astrology, because the moon is the simplest planetary object in the sky. I'm not trying to negate the majesty of the moon when I say that, but her movement is the simplest because every other planet has a retrogression pattern, and that's what I want to talk about ultimately with this video. But first, we need to understand what progression means from a geocentric point of view. So to understand progression, we will talk about the simplest planet, which is the moon. We see here the moon is in the 21st degree of Libra. Tomorrow, the moon will be in the 3rd degree of Scorpio, moving roughly 13 degrees as she does per day. Sometimes it's about 12-ish, sometimes about 14-ish, but on average, the moon's moving at a clip of about 13 degrees per day. Some other things to understand. Astrological charts are directional. So the left side of the chart is the eastern horizon. That's why you have your rising sign, because the east side of the chart right now, Aquarius, is rising on the eastern horizon. The western horizon is whatever's setting right now. So the sign Leo is setting in the western horizon. The top of the chart, the midheaven, aka high noon, is south, and the bottom of the chart is north, the other side of the world. That is what astrologers refer to as under the earth, the other side of the world, north. So here's the thing. All of the stars in the sky are moving east to west, right? They are rising in the east, getting high in the sky at the southern midheaven, and then setting on the western horizon. That is observable. You can see this every day. You look, oh, hey, there it is. Any planet, the moon, right? Heliocentrists, another incorrect take. They think the moon is traveling west to east. She's not. There's no illusions with the moon. The heliocentrists think the moon is rotating. Every single heliocentrist they'll never see the moon rotate. They will live and die without ever seeing the moon rotate, because why? She doesn't rotate. It's the craziest thing. Like they're wrong about the simplest things. They also think she's traveling west to east when that's observably untrue. She's moving in the same direction as every other super celestial body. But again, this is teaching you how the celestial bodies in the sky, the stars, the planets, and the luminaries move actually, and observe. You can see it with your own eyes. That's what's beautiful about this. The moon is the best. You should really closely study the moon. So anyway, they rise in the east, set in the west. So here's the thing. The moon's doing the same thing. So if we're looking at the moon here in Libra today, tomorrow the moon's going to be in Scorpio, and that is progressing through the zodiac, right? Libra is the 7th sign of the zodiac. Scorpio is the 8th sign of the zodiac. However, what's interesting is that in order to progress through the zodiac, the moon is moving slower than the fixed stars and the sign. So, for instance, again, if the moon is traveling 360 degrees around this circle that is the heavens, that is the sky, then the moon is moving slower than the fixed stars. Because if the moon ends up in Scorpio, well, then that's 13 degrees less. But if this was 8 p.m., perhaps, right? And the moon was in Libra, and 8 p.m. tomorrow, the 21st degree of Libra is going to roughly be in the same spot. That's a physical spot in the sky. The 3rd degree of Scorpio is going to be in the same spot today as it is tomorrow. Whereas the moon will have changed about 13 degrees, which means that's 13 degrees less. So the fixed star has moved about 360 degrees around, whereas the moon 347 degrees around, which means to progress through the zodiac, you must move slower than the fixed stars. Why was this important to understand? For all of that, to progress through the zodiac is to move slower than the fixed stars. Well, to retrogress through the zodiac must be to move faster than the fixed stars, right? If you're moving east to west around this zodiacal clock, turn, and you're in Libra and you end up in Virgo over here, then whatever celestial body did that must have been moving faster than the fixed stars and the signs. Again, heliocentrists, another folly of heliocentrism. They think retrogression is illusory.
Early astronomers who thought that Earth was stationary and at the center of the solar system. In the 2nd century, Ptolemy devised a complicated system of loops and orbits within orbits to account for the retrograde motion of planets. That model was accepted for 1500 years because it seemed to fit the observations, even though it was completely wrong. Once Copernicus showed that all the planets, including Earth, move around the sun, then retrograde motion was easily explained as an illusion.
That is not true. Once you see these retrogression patterns, thinking that this is illusory is just hilarious because it's so obviously intelligent design. The way these planets and luminaries move in the sky is so magnificent once you start truly understanding it. It is the most beautiful, intelligent design, and God put it there for us to study. Mercury's rule for retrogression. Mercury will complete 3 retrogressions in a row, with each retrogression beginning and ending in each of the 3 signs of a given element, before proceeding to retrogress into the next element in the order of water, air, earth, fire. Mercury is the planet and figure most closely associated with the sacred art of alchemy, which deals with the transmutation of the elements. In mythology, the planet Mercury has been personified as Thoth Hermes Trismegistus. It is not a coincidence that Mercury retrogresses elementally. What I mean when I state that Mercury retrogresses elementally is that Mercury retrogresses through the fire signs, to the water signs, to the air signs, and finally to the earth signs, and then again back to the fire signs, ad infinitum. Importantly, Mercury perfects his elemental trine before moving to the next element. What I mean when I say that Mercury does that, he perfects his elemental trine before moving to the next element, is that Mercury always achieves 3 retrogressions in a row, where these 3 consecutive retrogressions each begin and end in a sign of the same element. You can see here that Mercury in 2024, from November 26th to December 15th, was retrogressing, beginning in Sagittarius and ending in Sagittarius. And then March through April, he retrogressed from Aries to Aries. And then in July through early August, he retrogressed through Leo, which is happening right now. That's the current retrogression, Mercury retrogressing through Leo. That's the last of the fire elemental trine, and then you'll see his next retrogression, November 10th, 2025 through November 30th, 2025. Mercury will begin retrogressing in Sagittarius, and then end that retrogression in Scorpio, the water sign. So you'll see that the pattern is not deniable. He retrogresses, and he won't move. Like, he'll retrogress retrogress through the water signs next and will not retrogress to the air signs until he retrogresses in Pisces, beginning and ending in Cancer, beginning and ending in Scorpio, and then his next one begins in Pisces, and then wow, we have the air, and then we have a couple where it's mixed, and that's fine. And then you see beginning in Aquarius, ending in Aquarius, beginning in Gemini, ending in Gemini, beginning in Libra, ending in Libra. And that is an incredible pattern for Mercury to trine, for Mercury to retrogress like that. And heliocentrists claim, oh, Mercury is retrogression. That's just an illusion. I ended up tracking Mercury through October 13th, 2041, about 55 retrogressions is how deep I went tracking Mercury with this pattern, and the pattern held true the entire time. He would get 3 retrogressions in a row in the same element and then move on to the next element. Mercury's retrogression pattern of elemental progression solidifies his role as neither a benefic nor a malefic. His retrogressions are entirely self-interested. Thomas H. Burgoyne writes, "The specific action which Mercury radiates is purely intellectual and scientific. Mercury's retrogression patterns produce neither positive nor negative result with regularity. As you will see in the following 2 sections on Venus and Jupiter, the retrogression patterns of the benefic planets do aim to produce positive results." So here are Venus's rules for retrogression. Venus has 2 rules for retrogression. Venus will aspect Mars in the following sequence with a different aspect happening each retrogression: trine, sextile, conjunction, sextile, trine, sextile, conjunction, sextile, trine, ad infinitum. Put that more simply, Venus's retrogressions produce a sextile with Mars at the end of every other retrogression. The other retrogressions alternate between trines and conjunctions. So when Venus retrogresses, she makes an aspect with Mars every time, and this is the order. It's beautiful and it's color coded here. A sextile, then a conjunction, then a sextile, then a trine, then a sextile, then a conjunction, then a sextile, then a trine, and it's over and over. It alternates between sextiles and then either trine or conjunction alternating. And if you're even moderately well versed in astrology, you should understand the significance of that. You know, those are all positive aspects. This video is titled "Why Planets Go Retrograde" or something like that. This is the why. Venus retrogresses to aid Mars. She's trying to help him out, like literally. Venus's second rule for retrogression: Venus will most often perfect these aspects in the following signs in order: Capricorn, Leo, Pisces, Libra, and Taurus. When it came to tracking Venus's retrogressions, I at first treated her like I did Mercury. I was just tracking, okay, she's beginning her retrogression in this sign, ending it in this sign, beginning it in this sign, ending it in this sign. And this is one instance where I disagree with modern astrologers on a lot of it. But a big one is, I think the most important part of the retrogression is where the planet ends up in. Many astrologers, Venus is retrogressing in Aries when she's beginning her retrogression in Aries and ending in Pisces. And it's like, no. Venus is retrogressing to Pisces. She is moving faster than the fixed stars on purpose in order to form an aspect with Mars at her exaltation. That is why Venus retrogresses. That's why geocentrism is so important, is because maybe this wouldn't make sense unless you knew that stars are revolving around us. They're all closer to us. Astrology is completely not a pseudoscience. It is knowledge. You know, that's what the word science means, by the way, is knowledge. You know, if someone possesses omniscience or omniscience, well, omni means all, science means knowledge. It's all knowing, omniscience, yes? If someone has prescience or prescience, that's forethought or foresight, foreknowledge. So the word science really just means knowledge. And astrology is incredible knowledge. So to call it a pseudoscience is so laughable because the only way you can criticize it is if you do not understand it. Where heliocentrism is the opposite. The more you understand it, the more you can laugh at it and criticize it if you understand all of it. But I digress. So the second rule is equally as incredible. So this is where Venus tends to retrogress to, which is incredible. She tends to retrogress into Pisces, which is her exaltation, Libra, her domicile, Taurus, her domicile, Capricorn, Mars's exaltation, and then Leo, even to just moderate understanding of astrology, and you see the significance of that. She tends to retrogress into those signs in that order pretty much every time. Once in a while, she doesn't, because the first rule takes more precedence, is she wants to aspect Mars. That's the number one thing that happens. The aspect with Mars is always happening. And then what's interesting is that she will finish retrogressing and then double dip back into the same aspect. So these aspects tend to hold for a very long time. And that's why these aspects tend to happen toward the end of her retrogression and not at the exact end of it. They desire to hold these aspects for as long as they can. It's undeniable. Venus retrogresses to aspect Mars. She prefers to do it in specific signs, which is just incredible. Her domiciles, her exaltation, Mars's exaltation, and then the domicile of the sun, Leo, are all the places that Venus wants to be at while holding the sextile conjunction or trine with Mars. So we get the word sex from the number 6, which is why a sextile is a 60-degree separation. And of course, when you think Mars and Venus, what is sex? It's men and women, you know, like the battle of the sexes. And sextile is the most frequent aspect achieved by Venus during her retrogressions. The conjunction, the conjoining, that's togetherness. That's also sexual in nature, the word conjunction. We get the word conjugal from that too, right? A conjugal visit, to have sex. Coming together is to conjoin. So Venus does that. And then the trine is just the most positive aspect in astrology. A trine is very, very good. Venus loves Mars. That just is what it is. Venus loves Mars. Ancient astrologers knew this. Her retrogression pattern proves it. While Venus retrogresses to aid Mars, Jupiter retrogresses to aid the Sun. Jupiter's retrogressions always begin and end with a trine to the Sun. Jupiter's rule for retrogression. Jupiter will begin retrogressing when the Sun is in the sign of the same element, which is nearest to the east, and will end his retrogression when the Sun is in the sign of the same element nearest to the west. Jupiter will form a trine aspect with the Sun as his retrogression begins, and once again when his retrogression ends. Jupiter retrogresses in order to maximize his trine aspect with the Sun. Jupiter's domiciles, Pisces and Sagittarius, trine the domiciles of the Sun and Moon. Guido Bonatti claims the ancients came to know the aspects of astrology by studying the domiciles of the planets in relation to the domiciles of the luminaries. And Jupiter's domiciles, Pisces and Sagittarius, trine the domiciles of the Sun and Moon, Leo and Cancer. Signs of the same element trine one another. A trine is a 120-degree separation in the circle of the sky that is the heavens. Jupiter is known as the greater benefic, and the trine is the greatest benefic aspect. If Jupiter is in Aries, he's going to start retrogressing when the Sun is in Leo and end when the Sun is in Sagittarius. If Jupiter is in Taurus, then he will begin his retrogression when the the sun is in Virgo and end it when the sun is in Capricorn. If Jupiter's in Gemini, he'll start the retrogression when the sun is in Libra and end it when the sun is in Aquarius. If Jupiter is in Cancer, it'll go from Scorpio to Pisces, on, just down the wheel with that same pattern where it's he's just trining with the sun as he begins and ends his retrogressions. And that's it. That's what Jupiter brings to the table as far as retrogression patterns go, but it's beautifully simple. This on top of everything else is incredible. Jupiter's there to aid the sun. So now, with the retrogression patterns of the benefics and Mercury out of the way, let's talk about the malefics because they're equally as interesting. So here's Mars's rule for retrogression. Mars will never form a conjunction or sextile aspect with Venus during his retrogressions. That's not great. So Venus does the opposite. She tries to sextile or conjoin Mars, whereas during Mars's periods of retrogression, he will not. Mars will occasionally oppose, occasionally trine. There's no real pattern. There is, I figured out one thing that he wouldn't do, and it's that. But there's no pattern, and that makes sense because Mars is a malefic. So anyway, I studied Mars's retrogressions up to the year 2087, and I could find no reliable patterns. And the same was true for Saturn. Both malefic planets did not produce positive results with their retrogressions. That was unique to only Venus and Jupiter. The retrogressions of Mars do not produce any benefic aspects with Venus with any regularity. There's the occasional trine. Mars most often forms 3 aspects with Venus during his retrogressions, either square, opposition, or trine to Venus. And that is just perfectly in line with his nature. So Saturn is perhaps my favorite planet to discuss. Saturn's rule for retrogression. Saturn retrogresses 7 degrees. That's it. Saturn doesn't produce any aspects to any specific planet with any regularity. He retrogresses 7 degrees. And I find that to be so incredible because everything about this planet it screams 7. Everything about Saturn screams 7. The ancient Hebrews called Saturn Shebo, which means 7 in Hebrew, or Shebo. It's Hebrew. I don't speak Hebrew, but it's Shebo. It means 7 in Hebrew. That was their name for the planet. And this is another heliocentrism versus geocentrism W, which geocentrists can't stop taking because heliocentrists believe that Saturn is the 6th planet, right? It's the 6th planet from the sun. Saturn's number 6, Earth is number 3, right? The 3rd rock from the sun. But in reality, Saturn is the 7th planet from Earth, right? It is the first orb in the circle of orbs, right? Because a lot of the ancients started counting from Saturn, but from Earth, Saturn is the 7th super celestial body. It's the furthest from Earth. Everything about Saturn relates to the number 7. When Saturn retrogresses, Saturn goes back. And when I say 7 degrees, it is exactly 7 degrees. It's like plus or minus a few minutes, 7 degrees. And I find that to be incredible. And I do really think that mixing up Saturn and people's understanding of Saturn and the cosmos it disconnects people from God and the truth. I think, and I think this is part of the why, because thinking Saturn is the 6th planet, right? So here's this, and this is just going down. This is less about retrogression, more about Saturn, but whatever. So 666 is sex, right? So which planet is all about reproduction, fecundity, spreading the seed, so to speak? Maybe this planet exalts in Cancer. Yeah, Jupiter, right? So 666 is really, I think, more Jupiterian than Saturnian, and I think it's been a big psyop to mix up 666 and 777 because Saturn is cruel. And think about who's looking for 777s, right? People at the slot machines. So how evil and nefarious is that? And it's usually old people at the slot machines. Very Saturnian, going for those 777s, And what's interesting is The numbers 1, 2, and 3 make up all other numbers. Saturn is the 7th planet, and 7 is made up of the numbers 1, 1, 2, 3, which is the beginning of the Fibonacci sequence, which is all about divine proportionality. The Fibonacci sequence, a lot of people call it like, oh, that's sacred geometry. But what it really is, it's numbers that occur in nature. And Saturn is said to be the supercelestial body that is responsible for the construction and corruption, meaning the creation and destruction of all material, right? We all come in through the moon, but Saturn takes first and last action on our physical bodies, allegedly. So the fact that it's associated with the Fibonacci sequence, right? 1, 1, 2, 3. What's 1 plus 1 plus 2 plus 3? Well, that's 7. So the Fibonacci sequence is embedded in the number 7. Saturn exalts in Libra. If Aries is the first sign, Libra is the 7th sign. The reason this is important is because heliocentrists believe that retrogression is illusory. So you've seen Mercury retrogress elementally, undeniably. He does not move to the next element until he gets 3 in a row in the same element. Fact. Venus retrogresses to aspect Mars, sextile, conjunction, sextile, trine, over and over, without fail. Jupiter trines the sun. Mars is chaotic, as Mars is. There's no pattern with Mars, and why should there be? And meticulous Saturn, the timekeeper, tick, 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 goes back 7 degrees exactly every time. And heliocentrists think, oh, it's just an illusion. You know, if you're practicing tropical astrology, you're practicing a geocentric planar science. Just FYI, there's no way around that. It just is what it is. And if you're a studied astrologer, you also know that there's truth in astrology, or else you wouldn't be here. You wouldn't be studying astrology. It's geocentric for a reason, because geocentricity works, because that's just reality. It just is what it is. So that is why the planets retrogress. That is why it's important. It is, in my opinion, just absolutely incredible. I figured this out just because I understand that, okay, if we live in a geocentric universe, then clearly retrogression is not illusory. What's really going on? And it led to answers. So until next time.